Okay, at this time, I'd like to call to order our workshop for the purpose of, I just tossed aside my PowerPoint. This is to talk about our mobility resolution and to give opportunity for questions from both the board and the public. And I believe Ms. Richard has a report to begin this. Everybody hear me okay? We're using a new... Okay, you cannot hear Ms. Walker, okay. I will get a little, now I'll get a little closer there with it, okay? Okay, Ms. Richard, thank you.
Thank you. The first thing that I think I would like to explain is that what I'm doing tonight is giving you basically like the background as to how we got where we are today. Thank you. Thank you. The background as to how we got to where we are today, and kind of an understanding of what this is all about and the whole picture. What you will be voting on later on in the commission meeting is the ordinance. So a lot of what I'm showing you today is not what you're going to be voting on. For instance, when we come to the fee schedule, that is not what you're voting on. You're voting on an ordinance as to whether to accept the comprehensive plan changes, which would allow for the mobility system to go ahead, which would include the mobility fee. But after we take this through the process of first reading and second reading for the comp plan amendment, it would get sent to the state, who have already approved it, but it still has to go through the process of being sent to the state. And then they make sure that we haven't changed anything or whatever, and then within a given amount of time, 30 days, they'll tell us, yes, that's fine. And at that point, we can then change the Unified Land Development Code. So the changes to the code which would implement the comprehensive plan will also come back to you as an ordinance. And I'm recommending that that fee schedule, you'll see in the ordinance, that fee schedule is not in there, it's just referenced. And the same with the ULDC, the fee schedule will be referenced, much in the same way as other fees are referenced. And then that means that when the fees are changed, you don't have to go about changing the comprehensive plan or the ULDC. And it means you really don't have to focus too much on those fees right now, because there is going to be time for discussion on those. That is not what you're voting on today, the specifics. So let me proceed with with this workshop. And I apologize that your handouts have, the text is really small, but I just wanted you to, I think with glasses you should all be able to see the text, and you've got space to make notes if you need to. Yeah. So background information. The city used to have transportation impact fees. We still do, it's just that they were frozen. They were prohibitive to development because they were so high. The ones for single family homes are still being charged per single family home as a building permit is pulled. But anything other than single family homes, we have not been charging impact fees for because they were so high. Proportionate fair share was something that the state had required cities and counties to have. And with proportionate fair share, we had to collect monies for failing segments of roads. So, for instance, if there was a portion of Highway 77 between one traffic light and another traffic light that was failing its level of service, which I'll explain to you a little bit later on, the state required that we collect fees for that, and those fees could only be used to remedy that failing segment of road. As opposed to impact fees, with impact fees, you could use them anywhere in the city, but just for roads. So that was the difference between those two. Now, there were changes in the legislation which said that if a city or a county qualified as a DULAS, which is a dense urban land area, which the city of Lynn is, we're a DULAS, that means we have at least 1,000 people per square mile. If we qualify as a DULAS, we can elect to repeal proportionate fair share. So proportionate fair share was something we didn't have a choice in. We had to collect it. But because we're a DULAS, we're now allowed to take it away. We don't have to collect that now. However, they did recommend, and as you'll see a little bit later, that we replace it with something so that we've got a way of bringing in some kind of money towards the roads when the roads start getting very congested. So what is concurrency? Because the concurrency management system was something that the state required us to have. Concurrency requires that new development, because new development places demands on public infrastructure, the infrastructure must be in place prior to or concurrent with development. We're used to thinking in terms of water and sewer as infrastructure, but roads are also infrastructure. So with concurrency then, the state's view is that the city should not be allowing development to take place where there is not capacity on the roadway system to accommodate the trips that will be created from that new development. And the prop share was a way of making sure that cities and counties didn't do that, because they said, you know, basically you're putting that traffic on the roads, so if you don't collect prop share for segments that are beginning to fail, we're not going to let you have the land use change or develop. So roads are infrastructure. Roads are now exempt, but we still need to send land use amendments to DEO and DOT for comment. So when we have a land use change, such as we did with a fuel depot, or even smaller ones, you know, when we have the 10 acres or less, or 10 acres or more, we have to send all of those to the state because the land use is state controlled. They require that we send a copy of that to other reviewing agencies, such as DEP, DOT. There are a number of them that get a copy of it. And although they're not requiring us, because we're a DULAS, to have proportionate fair share, DOT review the land use change. They did this with the fuel depot when we sent the land use change for the fuel depot to them. And DOT did send us comments back because they were concerned about the density and the number of units. And that amendment had to be changed slightly so that they would give us the go-ahead. So even though we don't have to have proportionate fair share and they say that roads are exempt, they still review the land use changes. And if we were putting traffic on the roads that were congested, if we wanted a land use change from, let's say, low density residential to medium or high or commercial, and we had a congested road and we didn't have anything in our comprehensive plan that was addressing how we were going to remedy that, they could disallow the land use change. So we could get to a situation whereby our land use changes are not permitted to go through if we don't address it in some way. So concurrency fees then were calculated with cars in mind in the past. So nobody thought about anything except for the number of extra car trips that were going to be put on the road, using vehicle trips to determine how much a developer should pay. And concurrency impeded the ways that development could happen, because if an area was congested, you couldn't develop there. The state wasn't allowing you to develop there, and so what was happening was developers were going outside of that congested area, and that was leading to sprawl, because either they weren't allowed to, or they would have to pay too much in proportionate fair share, so they didn't want to develop. And that is why the legislation changed again, in order to try and kind of encourage development. So now Florida allows municipalities to factor other kinds of travel into the fee, including person miles traveled, thereby promoting compact and mixed-use development. So mobility fees can be used for things other than just roads. A mobility fee can fund multimodal infrastructure, including roads, but also transit. So if you wanted additional trolley stops or services, you could use it for that. Bike lanes, sidewalks, rails to trails, anything, golf cart provision, special golf cart lanes, anything that helps the mobility of people, you can use these monies for. So it's much less restrictive. It gives much more flexibility, encouraging the type of development that cities and counties want to see. A legal overview of the mobility systems in 2009, in the 2009 legislation, cities and counties were asked to evaluate and consider the implementation of a mobility fee to replace the existing transportation concurrency system. So this is something that the state wants to see. The state wants mobility fees. A mobility fee should provide for mobility needs, ensure that development mitigates its impacts on the transportation system, and promote compact, mixed-use, and energy-efficient development. In 2011, in the Community Planning Act, Section 163.3180 of Florida statutes said local governments are encouraged, and this comes from the state, so the state's encouraging us, to develop tools and techniques to complement transportation concurrency, including long-term strategies to facilitate development patterns that support multimodal solutions, including urban design and appropriate land use mixes, exempting or discounting impacts of locally desired development, such as developments in urban core areas, infill, redevelopment, or job creation and mixed-use development on the transportation system. And what that means is they're encouraging us to develop a system whereby where we want to see development occur, such as infill areas or redevelopment, we can charge those areas less than where we really don't want them, to discourage sprawl. So we can have a tiered system. And in 2013, there was a new subsection added which said if a local government elects to repeal transportation concurrency, which we have done, it is encouraged to adopt an alternative mobility funding system that uses one or more of the tools and techniques identified in that paragraph I just read. A mobility fee-based funding system must comply with the dual rational nexus test applicable to impact fees. An alternative system that is not mobility fee-based shall not be applied in a manner that imposes upon new development any responsibility for funding on existing transportation deficiency. So therefore, if we implement a mobility fee, developers pay for their impact, but they're not required to fix problems that are already there. And the dual rational nexus test, the nexus test is more favorable than the prop share calculation. It can bring in more revenue overall because it's not just for individual segments of failing roads. It can also create predictable, equitable, and easy to calculate fee schedules, whereas prop share was none of those things, neither of those things, and it's a more predictable revenue source for capital planners, which would be you, as opposed to me. We can clearly spend mobility fees on other modes, transit, bicycle, pedestrian, rails to trails, and local roads. And we can tailor mobility fees to land use goals, smart growth, economic development, etc., and help reduce sprawl. A rational nexus test between proposed development and the need for additional capital facilities for which the fee or exaction is imposed, the needs prong has to be taken into consideration. And there also has to be a rational nexus between the improvement and expenditure of funds collected and the benefits accruing to the development. So it has to be shown that what you're using the money for, the improvement, is actually going to benefit the people that need it. So you have to kind of justify it. You can't just arbitrarily say, oh, we want to spend money on this or that. Now, with the grant that we got, and I'll explain that in a moment, because the city is the size that it is, it was determined, there's a chart that they can use for like vehicle miles traveled, typical vehicle miles traveled to grocery stores, schools, that kind of thing, that basically anything we do, any improvement that we make, because we're such a compact city, is going to have a benefit to all of the citizens. At first, that was an area that the city attorney was a little concerned with, but the state are fine with it. We, put the language in to explain like our taking, or it wasn't me, it was the person that we contracted to actually, who was an expert in this kind of thing. And he determined that any benefit that was made in this city is going to benefit everybody in this city because our road system is so compact. So the grant authority. If you will recall, this mobility plan, the study and the plan was all funded, everything was funded via a grant. So the Department of Economic Opportunity put out a notice for a technical assistance grant pursuant to Section 163.3168 Florida statutes to provide direct and or indirect technical assistance to help Florida communities find creative solutions to fostering vibrant, healthy communities while protecting the functions of important state resources and facilities. We applied for technical assistance for this grant to help with mobility fee because we knew, well, I knew that it was something that in the in the statutes, the state was saying they wanted cities to do. The state wants counties and cities to have mobility fees and a mobility system. So I was pretty certain that if we applied for it, we would probably be successful in getting it, and we were, because it fits in with what they want. We had certain deliverables that we had to adhere to. We had a project kickoff meeting, public workshop to discuss the project scope in January of this year. The study area, state roads 77 and 390, and non-state roads were 389, 12th Street, Mowat School Road, County Road 2312, 26th Street, 24th Street, Minnesota Avenue, Baldwin Road, and Jenks Avenue. The deliverable 2 was the development of a mobility plan and cost projections of identified needs and opportunities, a proposed plan amendment, and amendment to City's Unified Land Development Code. We sent all of these things to the state. 2A said the city will prepare a mobility plan to facilitate multimodal mobility. And it identified that we'd consider PM peak hour traffic counts. And I don't know, I'm sure most of you, I was on 77 yesterday, PM peak hour, and I was really surprised at how much traffic was on that road. Normally I leave work at 4:30 or after a commission meeting, and I kind of head on down Pennsylvania. I've gone, and now I'm back. But yesterday I went up 77, so I happened to be coming back down 77 during PM peak hour time, and I couldn't believe how busy it was. So it's only a matter of time, I think, before we reach that, level of service cutoff. So we had to consider the PM peak hour and the needs as far as I've mentioned, bikeways, pedestrian walkways, etc. And then defined market areas or sub-areas where alternative mobility fees would be proposed. And then B, the city shall prepare a proposed comp plan amendment, a proposed amendment to its Unified Land Development Code, and a fee schedule to incorporate the mobility plan into the comp plan and the ULDC. So these were all requirements of the grant. We did these, you all voted to transmit those to DEO, and we sent those off, and then basically what happened, I'm going to skip through this because you know that we sent all that to DEO. What happened was DEO reviewed the proposed amendments, and they approved them. And so they sent back to us their approval, but said that if we wanted to go ahead and adopt the comp plan amendment, it had to be done within 180 days of our receipt of that letter. And the 180 days is up in January. And so that's why I'm bringing the ordinance that has basically been pre-approved by them to you tonight for first reading, and then the second reading will be, which will be a public hearing, will be on the agenda of the December commission meeting for you to vote on basically whether you want to adopt it or not. That's the comprehensive plan changes. So it's that ordinance that's in your packet that you would have seen. And I know that I was asked to give you all the mobility plan today. I don't know if that was emailed to you. You've seen that before. Those of you that were on the board back then will have seen that before. And I was concerned that that might throw you a bit, because that was the plan. That is not what you're voting on. All you're voting on, I say all, what you're voting on is the ordinance to change the sections of the comprehensive plan to enable us to have the mobility schedule and system. These are I thought this was kind of interesting for any of you who aren't familiar with this. You can go on the website, FDOT have counters, traffic counters, which you're probably aware of at certain intersections, because you're on the MPO or whatever, and you can pull this up and you can have a look to see what the latest counts are on these roads that the county provides counts for. They don't count all of the roads, they'll count the state roads and the larger roads. The smaller city roads, we had to put those strips across the road, and we did our own counts, which are some of the pages in that massive handout you got emailed to you, were all the counts over the days. But I thought that might be quite interesting. And then this just shows you or explains level of service. Basically, we have for each road in the concurrency system, which are the major roads, not the local roads, we have a level of service which is required. And dependent upon whether it has 2 lanes or it has signals or not, there is a level of service volume, traffic volume, which is given out by, there are tables, it's DOT. We don't decide on what those volumes are, FDOT do. So they'll say for this kind of road, a 2-lane road, the level of service is so many vehicles, annual average daily traffic, so many vehicles. Once you start getting within like 90% of that, then your road is about to fail. And then obviously when you reach that amount, your road is failing. And we currently have some roads within the city, they're yellow on this chart here, and they're in the packet that I sent you, which are near failing or are in the red and are failing. However, one of those is 390, that's the one that's failing. And when the amendments have been made, when those improvements have been made, the FDOT are making the widening, that then turns to green, because that then will have those roads, instead of 2 lanes, whatever, it's going to have 6 lanes or however many lanes, and it's going to bring that level of service is going to, it's going to add so many more vehicle trips. So we won't be anywhere near that on those roads. But mobility fees will help us address problems that we may have on other roads, either intersection improvements we can make, we can decide to make improvements to parallel roads to help take some of the traffic off the really busy roads. You can decide, with mobility fees, you can choose how you want to spend those fees. This on this sheet, this is showing you the existing impact fees for the city of Lynn Haven. For a single family home, it's $449 per dwelling unit. Multifamily is $314 per dwelling unit, and a mobile home was $289, I think that says, per dwelling unit. Those were still being collected, but the non-residential were the ones that were frozen, because per 1,000 square feet, it was basically 4,500 per 1,000 square feet, which was really, really, prohibitive to development. And so the fee schedule that is being proposed is in your packets, but again, you're not, that's not, it's not identified in the ordinance. So I think we would probably have to check with Rob as to the best way of adopting the fee schedule, but we'd said that by reference, and then like as with the other fee schedules that you have, if you change the fee schedule, then that will go through a process, but it doesn't mean actually changing the comprehensive plan in the ULDC. What was being proposed with the mobility fee is basically that there's going to be 3 different levels. So there's going to be the urban cluster area, which is going to have a 50%. There's some new fees being proposed. The urban cluster area is the historic plat area, basically. And in the historic plat area, the fees will be reduced by 50% of what they would be outside the historic plat area. So, for instance, it's being proposed that outside the historic plat area, a single family detached resident would actually pay more. It would pay $1,000, whereas in the 50% in the urban cluster in the historic area, it would be paying about the same, $50 more. And in the CRA area, they're only going to be paying 10%, so it'd only be $100. So there's a 3-layer system, and also, that goes all the way down for institutional, recreational, office. In all of those categories, outside of the historic plat area is going to pay more than in the historic plat area, because if we can encourage redevelopment in our city here in this kind of area, we have, you know, empty lots, vacant lots that we can't get anybody on. We also have like old derelict buildings that this would be an encouragement for someone to come up and do a parcel assembly, buy a few of them and put a really nice retail development there. So this is supposed to be an incentive for redevelopment and revitalization and economic development and economic opportunity. If people want to go outside, further out, then they can, but they will be paying a bit more for their impacts to the roads. And then within the CRA, they'll only be paying 10% within the CRA. So that's going to encourage development within the CRA area. This is something that, you know, you can have more discussion on. You could also have another workshop just on this later on. But I wanted to bring it to you because I knew that there would probably be interest or questions. This was, in your packets, this was an example that Mike Hemmons, who carried out this study, put together, which compared Phase 2, for an example, Phase 2 of the reserve at North Shore consists of an additional 200 apartment units. The mobility fee schedule for this complex is calculated as follows. Residential dwelling units, multifamily apartments at 700 per dwelling unit. So Phase 2 scheduled for 200 new dwelling units would be 200 times 700 equals 140,000. Is that 1,700 or 700? I can't see. It's very small. But 140,000 for the 200 new dwelling units. So that would pay for, and like I said, you can use it anywhere in the city. So that could be used to help any part of the city that needed to have some kind of mobility improvements within it. It doesn't have to be used just for directly adjacent to that development. And that was just an example there. And that was a commercial example. This shows you the different segments. You can see in the pink there, that's the historic plat area. So that's where they'd get a 50% reduction. That includes the country club. And then you can see the CRA area. Within the CRA, they'd only be paying 10%. And then the orange, all of that orange outside is what would be paying the citywide fee, which is still for outside of residential, you know, for commercial, industrial, all of those uses is way, way, way reduced from what it had been before. So, and you know, and hopefully that's where, if we're going to have more industrial or whatever, that's where we would like to see it occur. And I think that was it. So that was just to give you a background as to how we got to this point. And I hope that helped a bit. Are there any questions?
I wouldn't even know where to begin.
It's kind of complicated. But just to let you know, rest assured that with the grant that we got, the technical assistance grant, I'm not a transportation engineer, and a transportation engineer is different from a traffic engineer, road engineer who designs roads, you know. And so what we did, I did a certain amount of it in-house. I did, you know, the comp plan amendments. I did what I could, and I did the public workshops and that kind of thing, so that we could use the money on expert help. And so what we did is we subcontracted through Panhandle Engineering. Panhandle Engineering did a bit of it, but the most of the work was done by Mike Hemmons, who is a transportation engineer. He used to work for DOT, actually. So he really knows his stuff.
If the commission were to move forward tonight with the ordinance, what would be next steps for the planning committee? What would be your first next step?
So tonight is just the first reading of the ordinance for the comprehensive text amendments basically to take out old dated language that's in there for things like 9J5 that don't even exist anymore. but then also take out that proportionate fair share language and concurrency language, which we don't have to have, and so, you know, why have it and be restricted like that when we can have our own thing. And then to put the language in, first reading tonight, then at the next commission meeting would be public hearing on it, on the ordinance and the changes to the comp plan. So I'll just be going through the changes to the comp plan with you then. And that would be the second reading, and that's when you would vote. That would be it. That would
I phrased my question incorrectly. I apologize. If what I was asking is, once the ordinance is passed,
okay.
not tonight, but when it's
okay.
passed,
What-
what will be next steps?
Okay.
I'm so sorry.
Once the ordinance is passed and is sent to DEO, once we hear back that it's all fine and they're good with it, then we can go ahead and we can proceed with the ordinance that will change the Unified Land Development Code.
Okay.
And when we change the Unified Land Development Code, that's when we can, after that, and that's just city, so it doesn't have to go to the state, but that will be 2 readings of an ordinance, then we can go ahead and start using it.
And so that would be an opportunity at that point for us to look again at the fees, the 3-tiered fee schedule and the other details.
I
of
believe,
that.
I
Okay.
think that would probably be right. Is that right,
Okay.
Rob? Yeah.
Okay, that was where I was headed. Thank you
Yeah,
very much.
because I think that would probably be like an appendix. So I'm not really sure. We'd reference it, and then I guess would the actual fee schedule be a separate agenda item, Rob, or would it?
The mobility, the mobility fees are going to be in the ULDC.
Well, no, I thought we were just going to do it by reference, so that if we changed them, then we don't have to change the ULDC. You know, like with the fee schedule, you know, it gets
Correct,
updated. I thought it was just going to be.
Typically, the way we do fee changes is by resolution, an appendix in the code. So that's, I haven't looked at this specifically, but that's probably how we would do it here too.
Okay, thank you.
Well, Mayor, if I may.
Yes, go ahead.
To kind of follow up with that, I had the exact same question. So, first of all, great presentation, a lot of good information, did a great job. I think it's good legislation. I think for Lynn Haven, being as unique as we are, we're really going to get the benefit from this new program and making the change. But yeah, just to clarify, that's where I was too, is I'd like to have a separate workshop, even perhaps a workshop, when we go over the fee appendix so that we can really drill down. Once we understand, which I think I have a good understanding of it now, a lot much better than before, if it does pass, then we have a separate meeting or a separate workshop to go over the fee structure. Because that is that can be a separate item or will be a separate item, like a Schedule A, if you will. Yeah. Thank you, Mayor.
Sure. Anyone else? Questions from the board? Okay. Are there any questions for Ms. Richard from the public for the workshop? Yes, sure.
Question. What it looks like here is we're increasing impact fees. And my question here is, are they regressive for people that are already living in their houses? Is they going to be taxed too? And is this a tax? My question actually is it an increase in the impact fees? Number 2, is it a tax?
Okay. Ms. Richard, and I didn't take it as an increase as much as I took it as it's a new way of scheduling it so that maybe the burden falls upon those who are outside of where the CRA is. But Ms. Richard, please.
This is only going to be for new development, so it isn't going to affect anybody who already, you know, has their buildings in place, has already developed what they've developed. In the main, this is actually going to decrease quite substantially what people would pay. There are some who will have an increase if they're outside of the historic plat. Then there will be an increase for single-family homes. Everything else is going to have a decrease. It's just for the single-family homes. Well, for residential, we'll have, if it's citywide, outside of the historic plat, is going to have an increase. Everything else, all the other types of uses are going to have a substantial, quite a dramatic decrease. For instance, you know, going down from, let's say, Health Fitness Club, going from 4,496 per 100 square feet to 700 at the most. That's if they're citywide. If they're in the 50%, then only 350 per square feet. And if they're in the CRA, only $70 per square feet. So single-family homes may have an increase for those developers that are going outside of the urban cluster. If they're within the urban cluster, they're paying a bit more, but not much. You know, like the difference between 449.68 to 500. What's that? That's like so many cents. But if they're in the CRA, then they're only paying 100. So and it will not affect people that are already there. It's just new development. For new development's impact. I mean, it's specified that we cannot make people pay for things that are, deficiencies that are already in place. So it's just new development.
Okay,
Can I
thank
ask a
you.
question, Mayor?
Yes, sure, go ahead.
I just wanted to ask, so I understand this has nothing to do with people that are already where they are. It's just new development. How is this going to impact the project, fuel depot project?
They will have to pay. They'll have to pay. Now, if they're a CRA, then they'll be paying the CRA amounts. If they're not a CRA, they'll be paying their higher amounts because they're not in the 50% cluster.
Are they aware of this, or is this? I guess I'm asking anybody who knows the answer. I mean, is this something that
They knew that we were. They know about the mobility, the plan. They knew we were doing this.
Oh, okay.
Now, let's say that they're not in. Let's say that they're not a CRA, and they have to pay the higher amounts. That money, they're paying those higher amounts, but I think the city's going to have some kind of flexibility because these monies can be used for rails to trails. And I believe that they were going to be spending some money towards rails to trails. So basically what they can be doing is this money can be their contribution to rails to trails or whatever. So I think that there are going to be areas within here that, the city, and it also mentions economic development, job creation. So this isn't an impact fee. It's not kind of stated to be an impact fee. So it's something that Rob will probably have to look into, but it may be something, I think, that it's supposed to be flexible.
Mayor, may I? Sure. On the second question, Ms. Cinder's question about are they aware of it? I mean, they are aware that we have a transportation impact fee. They are aware that we have not been collecting it because the commission had decided not to collect it a couple years ago, and they are aware that we are in the process of getting rid of concurrency and adding this mobility fee in there. I know that. I don't know about what their expectations might be. They were supposed to provide a development agreement, which they have not done yet, and so that might have avoided some of these issues. But that's kind of where that stands right now. I believe if this passes, they would probably have to pay that. But I don't know that until we get a development agreement and they finish up their development. On the first question, I just want to just kind of broadly explain the reason why there's this dual rational nexus. It's to avoid the tax question that Mr. Walker brought up. And historically, because I know we have some new commissioners here, historically, whenever the city or any kind of governmental entity charged a fee, there was always a challenge to that, saying that fee is not really a fee, it's a tax. And the taxes have to go to a referendum of the voters. And so this is an illegal tax. And so the courts have come up with, and now it's been adopted by statute, this dual rational nexus process that says it meets this dual rational nexus. It's not a tax, it's a fee. And so it basically, it can't apply, a tax applies to everybody, and can be spent anywhere for a public purpose. The dual rational nexus is a specific fee that is charged for a specific need, purpose, and is used for a specific thing. And there's some limitations on that, obviously, but that's the primary reason why we do these studies and adopt all this stuff by ordinance and get consultants to come in here is to clarify what that money is going to be used for, how it's levied, basically, or how it's paid, and then distributed. And that's why it's not a tax and considered a fee, and it doesn't apply to people who are not part of the new development, basically.
Sure, go ahead.
To give you a good idea, let's just say, we collected a grant of $268,000 for the rails to trails for looking at the feasibility and some of the preliminary engineering design. We're looking at also applying for a grant of about $3.3 million to construct this. Well, a lot of times when you apply for these grants, it's always good to see that the city is putting a little money in the project as well. So just to say we're 10%. So we're looking at about $330,000. This mobility plan, we'll be able to utilize this money to help put up for our $330,000 and not take from the taxpayers that's already here to pay for that. So it'd be that's just a specific example like Rob was mentioning.
More questions from the board, anyone? Any further discussion about the mobility plan, or is the workshop pretty well completed at this point? Is everybody content? The public, anyone else have anything else you'd like to add or ask? Okay, we thank you so much for your very thorough report
Thank
with all the
you.
information. Thank you so much. The workshop is now over, so I'll end it, adjourn it, and we will start our regularly scheduled commission meeting at 5:01 in compliance with Florida statute. So see you then.